Hey, it's Scott Petrak with another episode of the Brown Zone Coverage Podcast. Since we last talked, Deshaun Watson changed his mind, was introduced at a serious news conference, and the NFL held its owners' meetings. Joining me to discuss it all is Dave Chudowsky of the WKYC Morning News. How are you, Chud?
Scott, it almost feels like the regular season. Like it's been 3 games since we talked. We gotta break down 3 Sundays ago, Monday Night Football, and another game. It's like everything you just mentioned there, and everything we got to get to. It's crazy. The last time we talked was the morning of his decision to change his mind, and I think it was about 3:40, and I was driving home from working out, I think, and listening to the radio, and heard it come across that there was breaking news. So I jumped to Twitter real quick and saw it, and I couldn't believe it. And there's very few times, as you know, where in this business we're like, I can't believe it. But I know you feel the same way. I just was stunned because he said he wasn't coming here. We taped that last pod as if he was not coming here, and he changed his mind. And that just does not happen often.
No, you're exactly right. There was no heads up. I had talked to people who said he wasn't coming, right? So you'd heard it yourself. We taped that podcast, like you mentioned, with that being the news. Now, we did enough of, should he be coming and why it would be a good move football-wise if he did, and all those kinds of things. But the bottom line had been he wasn't going to be here. And that changed a lot from a ton of perspectives, right? From my perspective, it's, okay, well, now you don't have to worry about him coming and following the legal cases and the civil suits. And then it becomes what happens with Baker Mayfield. Is there a chance that he comes back? And, all the dominoes from the original decision to rule out the Browns. And then that all switched. And, sometimes, if you're in this business, you get a heads up. Yeah, something's coming, right? Where it's not a total surprise. I did not get that heads up this time. It was a total surprise when I saw it come across Twitter, and then it's working to track it down and to track down the contract, right, which we'll talk about, and to confirm all that, and then to kind of come to grips for the time being, and then the future that, all right, everything just changed, right? From a football perspective, we assume the Browns will be much better and Super Bowl contenders at some point, whether it's this year or in the future, because Deshaun Watson is that good. It also changes everything from a work perspective. Okay, now I have to call lawyers in Houston, and now I have to read all the civil lawsuits from the 22 massage therapists and just all that. And I know fans were dealing with the same kind of shock, and many fans struggle to get their head around it, like we talked about last time. So yeah, it was one of those rare moments that really is surprising to, I think, everybody that saw the news.
So this next comment I'm going to make, and, listen, sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong, but, we do our best to try to put perspective into it. We do our best to reason as to why we think things may or may not happen. And I made this comment last time we talked about, thinking he wasn't coming here. And I was like, well, did the Browns really think they could get him? Mm-hmm. I mean, a guy like Deshaun Watson, would he really come to Cleveland? I mean, would he want to play in the cold weather? Would he come to an organization that continually fails? And you made a great point. You're like, hey, listen, it's not necessarily like the NBA. They've gotten bigger name guys before. But to my point, and again, I was wrong in the fact of, I wasn't wrong that he came here because I didn't know whether he would or not. And when we taped that, we assumed he wasn't, right?
Right.
But what I was wrong about was the Browns actually thinking they had a chance, because obviously they did. But to show the context of how they had to have a chance, dude, they gave up a ton to get him, and $230 million. Listen, at the end of the day, you're going to give someone $230 million. They might go to the moon or Mars to play. I mean, Scott, $230 million guaranteed. Yeah. I mean, that's unbelievable.
It is. And, I think we want to break down the press conference a little bit more. But just on that topic is I didn't believe him. I didn't believe Deshaun Watson at all when he tried to say that he didn't know that the Browns had made it a fully guaranteed offer, and that didn't contribute to him changing his mind. I don't want to call him a liar, but I have a hard time believing that, right? I understand why you would say it. You don't want to come off as, it was about the money, and you want to say that you liked the Browns the whole time and the roster was the best, which it probably was. If you look at the final four contenders, I do think the Browns had the best roster. But he originally said no. And what changed between Thursday afternoon or Thursday evening and Friday afternoon was the fact that Andrew Berry went back and said, hey, we'll guarantee every dollar on this 5-year contract, which is unheard of in the NFL. The biggest guaranteed before that was Aaron Rodgers a couple weeks earlier, and that was just over $150 million. So it's almost an $80 million difference between what Deshaun Watson gets from the Browns and the next highest in NFL history. And to think that didn't factor in, it seems to stretch the imagination, number one. But we also talked about this, I think, last week, Judd. That's how you convince guys to come play here, right? Or guys to come play anywhere that isn't their first choice, is you throw a ton of money at them. And that's what the Browns did. And we can argue whether that's good or the right thing. We can argue whether that's going to screw up the NFL salary landscape, which we know that there's a feeling like that among owners, some silent, some not silent, like the Ravens. Steve Biscotti mentioned something the other day at the owners' meetings. But if the goal was, and obviously it was, to get Deshaun Watson, and you were willing to overlook the off-the-field stuff or get comfortable with the off-the-field stuff, then it became about doing everything possible to land him. And that meant 6 draft picks, including 3 first-rounders, going to the Texans, and it meant a record-shattering contract to Deshaun Watson. And the Browns did all of that because they thought it was that important, and they thought the opportunity to get a quarterback of this talent level at this age, he's 26, is so rare that you have to go above and beyond. And that's what the Browns wound up doing.
So I don't think you need to get into it fully because you explained yourself on the last pod. If anyone wants to hear that, they can go back and listen. You made it clear that from a football standpoint, you totally understood it. But from the off-the-field issues, you were against it. You also backed that up on Sports Tonight with Nick Camino, I saw on Sunday night. And do you stick with that? You don't have to go long on this, but have you changed your mind at all? I mean, are you still, now that you've had some time to let it marinate, how do you feel the fact that he's in a Browns uniform?
No, I've not changed my mind about that. I don't think if I were the Browns, I would not have gone after Deshaun Watson. Now, I say that by acknowledging I don't know if he's guilty of the things he's been accused of. I know what he said, and he said that he had never assaulted, harassed, or disrespected a woman. So that's on the record. I think it's important that I say that when I write about this, because that's his stance, and he's continued to deny any wrongdoing. But I tend to believe this. I believe women, and I believe this volume of women. Now, that doesn't mean Deshaun Watson did anything that he's accused of. But it just seems difficult for me to dismiss all these accusations. Having said that, I'm willing to let the civil lawsuits play out. I'm willing to, if there's more criminal cases, which there could be. I talked to the lawyer for the 22 women in the civil suits, and he said, hey, just because the 2 grand juries failed to indict doesn't mean there can't be more cases brought, criminal cases brought. He mentioned that some of the accusations, one was in California, at least one was in Georgia, one was in Arizona. So there's other places outside of Texas where this could become a factor. The league doesn't seem to believe that there's going to be any more criminal cases. I believe the Browns believe that that's a thing of the past, and it's all about the civil cases. So if that's the case, then we'll just have to monitor those. But it's a lot of it's about the volume to me. I read all of the civil lawsuits. since the last time we did a podcast, and there's a lot of graphic charges in there, and they're not easy to read. And you'd have to be willing to say that, yes, all these women were making up all these stories, and I just don't want to do that. So that's where I still stand. I'm willing to listen to everything Deshaun Watson has to say, willing to let everything play out. And I understand why the Browns did it from a football perspective, but I still have an issue with the pursuit. And I think it's interesting to note that during the news conference, which was filled with mostly, serious questions, that Deshaun Watson denied any wrongdoing. The Browns stopped short when they were asked specifically, hey, is this a case of you just, it doesn't meet criminal standards, but, Deshaun still did things wrong, it's things you're not, let's say comfortable with. And the Browns never really they didn't give a clear answer. It wasn't, hey, we completely believe Deshaun Watson. That was not the answer given. So I think the truth, I don't want to say the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I think the Browns, and they said this, got comfortable with Deshaun Watson and got comfortable with the situation. But to me, that's not the same as he didn't do any of these things, right? So I think that's a difficult situation to be in a nuanced situation. And that's how I left feeling the news conference. And I want your opinion on this, Judd. I think if you went in believing Deshaun Watson, then what he said would just kind of reaffirm that. But if you went in doubting Deshaun Watson, I'm not sure anything he said would make you change your mind. You know what I mean? What do you think about that?
Well, I didn't watch the entire thing. I caught most of it, but I do know that I've walked away thinking, man, he really is, I don't know what the word is, but he made you feel like if you didn't know anything else in the case and you just went by that press conference, you'd be like, man, this guy didn't do anything. Like he seemed pretty adamant about it. Talking about his, history with women and his family and the way he was raised and just the way the Browns sat next to him and whether they looked uncomfortable or not. I've talked to a few different people, and some people felt that Andrew Berry looked uncomfortable. Some people thought they looked fine. You could judge that, but it just by listening to him, it's like, wow, it didn't even happen. And then people also, and Scott, maybe, the criminal charges, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but what are the main reasons that he's not being indicted criminally?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't want to speak as an expert. I did speak to sexual assault experts who, in one of them, is testifies in a lot of cases, right? That she's an expert witness, and she said it's not unusual for these cases not to receive indictments because there's just a long history of people not believing sexual assault accusers and victims and survivors. And it's a lot of he said, she said, right? And there's not a lot of physical evidence as far as there's no videotapes, right? There's no audio tapes. It's Deshaun Watson and a massage therapist in a room together by themselves. And, so that becomes, yes, he did this and he says, I didn't do this, right? So I think that makes it more difficult to indict. I don't know how hard the prosecutor's office tried to indict. A lot of it is from the stuff you read about the legal system. A lot of it is based on how hard the prosecutor pushes to get an indictment. And maybe if the prosecutor felt, hey, even if we get an indictment, I'm not going to be able to convict, then I'm better off not even getting an indictment. So I understand that the NFL and the Browns, there's a team at the NFL as a whole, the teams that went after Deshaun Watson, including the Browns, they took that first lack of an indictment by the Harris County grand jury as the green light to go after Deshaun Watson, right? There's no doubt about that. But I don't think that means just because he's not, I've had enough people tell me that just because you don't get an indictment doesn't mean that a crime wasn't committed or doesn't mean that anything didn't happen. So, I think you can't ignore it from a legal perspective, certainly. I mean, that's the reality is he has not been indicted on these 10 cases, and that's important. But I just don't want to dismiss 24 women making these accusations until I have what I feel is proof that he's telling the truth and they're not.
Well, and you've seen people say 22 women don't lie. I mean, you've seen different people put that up on Twitter, and you said this, and we knew there was going to be backlash to this. Right. You're probably not surprised. I mean, the Browns have taken a lot of heat from different organizations and people canceling their season tickets and, not happy about this at all.
Yeah. And, that I would assume that that's going to fade, Chud, right? Depending on how strongly you objected to this, right? And there's people that objected so strongly that they said, I'm not rooting for the Browns anymore and I'm canceling my season tickets. Then there are others who, I don't like this, but, when we get to the fall, I'll watch the Browns, right? Then there's others that didn't care at all. It's about football to them. And then there's a group that feels he's innocent. Now, they don't have any more information than you and I do. They just feel he's innocent, right? And maybe they want to believe that. And I'm not saying any of those opinions is wrong. I'm just not sure anything we've learned has given us definitive information one way or the other. And that includes Deshaun Watson's denial, right? I thought it was, I did think it was strong. And I think it's important that he did that. But, that doesn't mean he didn't do anything, right? Plenty of people lie. Plenty of people, it's the right move for him to do. I'm not saying lying is the right move, but especially if you believe you're innocent, then you should proclaim that innocence, which is what he did. So I would understand if his interview, if that news conference changed people's minds, I would understand that. I just doubt it would for people that were kind of entrenched one way or the other. And you said you watched a good chunk of it, Chud. I mean, that was a really unusual news conference, right? That we've been through from a sports perspective, right? Because the tone was so serious.
And let me set you up for that because you were there, right?
Yep.
And that was the first in person in a while, right? Most of your pressers have been through Zoom.
Yeah, we had some players. We had Stefanski. We had Barry live for Odell. Okay. But it's the first time we've been in the media room since Andrew Barry got hired in 2 years. Yeah.
Okay, so there you go. So I want to set you up. First time in the media room in 2 years, packed house. And again, I don't want to put you on the spot. And if you don't want to answer it, don't do it. But what's your take? How did you feel their body language was, Barry and Stefanski? Was it uncomfortable? Did you think they were confident? Because I've seen a lot of different opinions on that. What's your take on the room?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mentioned the tone in, usually when you have one of those things, it's super celebratory, right? There's cameras clicking and there's smiles and they're holding the jersey up for a long time so everybody can get the picture. And it just wasn't that. I mean, they did the jersey at the end for, a few seconds. But it wasn't that. And I do appreciate that from the Browns. I think they set the right tone and they respected the seriousness of the discussion and of the allegations. I thought Andrew Barry, everybody opened with the statement. And in the statement, they acknowledged that this isn't easy for some people. And they acknowledged the seriousness of everything. I thought there was a question late in the news conference to Andrew Barry, and I don't remember the exact question, but he talked about having empathy for, sexual assault victims and empathy for people in those situations. And he was really, Andrew Barry's always, he talks softly and he's measured in his answers. That's just who he is. But this was another step or another level to that. And to me, there was some uncomfortableness in the answer, in that answer in particular, in just the answers in general, right? Because he's getting asked about, well, does this, did Deshaun Watson do anything wrong? Just the whole line, right? Why didn't you talk to the women and all the women in the civil lawsuits, all the serious, and I keep using serious, but all those serious questions. I felt some uncomfortableness coming from Andrew Berry, and I think that's natural. I don't know if that's just because of the nature of the discussion or some reluctance from him even to be there and even to be in this spot, right? Some reluctance to have put the organization and himself in this spot, right? And Jimmy Haslam says it was a football-driven move by the organization, that the football operations people started it, and he jumped on board. Now, we can argue whether or not to believe Jimmy Haslam there. If that's the case, then Andrew Berry is comfortable with this, and he's one of the leading people behind the decision to go chase Deshaun Watson. But I think if you wanted to play amateur psychologist, you could look at some of the body language and some of the answers and say, man, I'm not sure that they're fully comfortable with what they've done.
But at this point, I have to believe, this is just for me. So, and then there's the Zoom with the Haslams, and they weren't in town. They had to get that done right before the owners' meetings. I mean, that's why the timing of it, and they were out of town. I mean,
yeah, it was. Yeah, they were out of the country. And yes, they didn't want the first time they talked to be at the owners' meetings. And I respect that completely. And, the Deshaun Watson giving depositions last Tuesday and Wednesday in Houston also affected the timing, right? Which is why it was later in the week. He wasn't able to get to Berea. So, yeah, and I know the Haslams took a bunch of grief for it. And, I don't know how easy it would have been for them to get here. I'm glad they did the Zoom interview. That was 100% necessary. Would have been better if they were on the same platform. Yes. I think that would have been a much better look, but at least they talked. At least they talked.
My take from the Haslams is it's hard for me to, when Haslam talks, when Jimmy does, I don't want to say I don't take him seriously, but I'm looking at a guy who, in my mind, is going to do whatever he can do to get this team to the Super Bowl and on top, because he's tried everything. The organization's tried everything. To me, from a football standpoint, and you put everything else aside, they need an elite quarterback. This was their chance to get it. And, that's the bottom line for me when it comes to him. Now, D-talking, being a female, obviously, and this being such a serious issue off the field, when she talks and says she feels comfortable, that means a little bit more to me. Doesn't mean it's okay. Doesn't mean I believe them. It doesn't mean it has nothing to do with how I feel emotionally. So I just get a different vibe from each of them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And I get what you're saying, and I would probably agree with that. They talked about how they have two daughters, and they put them in a room with Kevin Stefanski, Andrew Berry. I don't know if they're in an actual room or it was a virtual room, but with Kevin Stefanski, Andrew Berry, Paul DePodesta, people in the football department, like for a series of Sundays, and had them kind of grill the football people why this was an okay move. And I think that's interesting. I also wonder, Dee talked about how this was a long process to get comfortable with Deshaun Watson. And I'd be interested in your take on this, Dave, that if it's a long process and it wasn't easy to get there, am I wrong to think that means that you learned some stuff that you weren't comfortable with? You know what I'm saying? Like, if Deshaun Watson was completely innocent and had never done anything, then is it that difficult to get comfortable with him? You know what I mean? Or is it just the volume that makes it tough to get comfortable? And I don't know that, and I don't want to, cast aspersions, but I just think the fact that Dee in particular made such a big deal about, or stressed that it was a long journey to get comfortable with Deshaun Watson. I don't know. It kind of raised I don't know, raised the red flag isn't the right word, but it's the right phrase. But I wondered exactly what she meant by that. And, I know that they did all this investigation and they talked to, a third person lawyer, looked into everything. But I don't know. It just struck me that she said that. And I get that the result is, hey, we got very comfortable with Deshaun Watson. But I don't know. Did that jump out at you at all?
Oh, I think that's just her basically making it clear that they didn't just make a rash decision, right? I mean, does that mean that maybe she means that after they talked to him and got to know him better, because that seems to be their big deal, is like how they felt after they got to know him better.
Right.
I think they look like complete idiots if they say they didn't investigate and talk to people. So from that standpoint, I could kind of get it. But I totally know what you're getting at. Yeah.
I mean, and it's the fact that, they did bring their daughters into it. I thought was interesting. And then, got sign off from everybody and talked to women within the organization, right? All of which is important, clearly. But when you go back to Jimmy Haslam, Judd, your point is right? He's willing to do whatever's necessary to get this team to be a winner. And, Jimmy's done a lot of things that Browns fans aren't happy with, aren't proud of, in his nearly 10 years as owner, right? He's done stuff off the field too, right? The whole Pilot Flying J scandal was a tough one for the organization and tough one for him. But I don't think there's any doubt that he's willing to spend money. He's willing to put himself out there to try to get the situation right and try to get this team to be a winner and to get to the Super Bowl. And we've seen that through him changing coaches and GMs when he thinks he's wrong, right? Willing to pay those guys, willing to admit mistakes, whether or not it's too early when he admits his mistakes. Now, this is the biggest of those moves, right? It's the most controversial. It's one that maybe draws, side-eye glances at the owners' meetings in Palm Beach, Florida, because he just reset the market for quarterbacks and maybe the guaranteed market for elite players in other positions as well. And he doesn't care. And I think if you're a Browns fan, that means something to you and you appreciate that, especially when you contrast it with, what the Guardians are doing, not spending any money. So that's why this is such a complex issue, right? It's because you have the football thing where, from a football perspective, it's, man, the Browns are all in. You appreciate that. I think it's the right move. I don't have any issue with giving up 6 draft picks. I don't have any issue with paying him that contract, right? That's what you have to do to get an elite quarterback who's already proven in this league, right? 3-time Pro Bowl. I get all that. And so from a football perspective, I think it's a really, really strong move. And especially when you don't have any alternatives, right? Was the alternative trading up to try to get Malik Willis? Was it waiting and getting Jimmy Garoppolo, or, maybe trying to get Matt Ryan even? And then you got to figure out your long-term answer at quarterback still, right? Those are the options that Andrew Berea and Paul DePodesta had. And they're not a lot of great options. So this was the most sure thing from a football perspective that they had on the table. And I understand the admiration for being able to pull that off. I really do. All the reservations are completely off the field.
Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, it's, can you look yourself in the mirror? But then the question is, does it matter if there's no reflection anyway? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, and, so, they did get comfortable. That was the word they kept using. I believe the fact that the 2 grand juries came back was huge to the Browns' thinking, is that we don't have to worry, and whether or not this changes, is we don't have to worry about him going to jail, right? It's all about these civil suits. It could cost him money, whatever. And there's a suspension likely looming from the league. But the Browns are viewing this as a long-term thing, and that Andrew Berry stressed it. The important thing to them in the contract was 5 years, because that's a long time to have a quarterback. And if there's a lengthy suspension, whatever that number is, right? They have that extra year on the back end, which they would not have had if they didn't restructure the whole contract.
So now, criminally, you're right. That's a huge thing. You know, he's not going to go to jail. That is if nothing else comes up and it goes back to a criminal proceeding, because that could still happen, right?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's the kind of thing where I don't think you can ever just rule it out, right? I mean, until the statute of limitations is over, one of the remaining women in the civil lawsuit can certainly try to file criminal charges, right? That's not unheard of. I don't think it can be ruled out. Now, I think Deshaun Watson's legal team feels comfortable that either that's not going to happen and/or, well, we already had success in these first 2 grand juries. Why would it be any different moving forward?
And Roger Goodell just spoke the other day, if you want to maybe summarize all of that. But, you know, just my take after listening to him was, without him coming out and saying it, it feels like he's going to get suspended. Like, it's hard to imagine, no matter what happens, there's not some sort of suspension, or am I wrong there?
No, I agree with you. The only way I see there not being a suspension is if all 222, if all 22 civil lawsuits play out and they go to trial and Deshaun Watson wins all of them, then I think he's in a strong case where you could say, you know, hey, how do we suspend this guy when no criminal cases and he won every civil lawsuit, right? I think that would be the only way. And having said that, the NFL can do their own punishment regardless of anything else. They do their own investigation. So it's not necessarily tied to that, but I think Deshaun Watson would have a strong case and the Browns would have a strong case if he won every civil lawsuit. But the timeline on that, there is no timeline on that, right? I mean, I talked to the lawyer for the 22 women, and he said the first trial looks like it's scheduled for early fall or just before the fall. Well, obviously that conflicts with football season. And he said, well, we're willing to work around football season. So that means, do you wait until after the season to start the first of 22 trials? I mean, how long would that take, right? So I don't know if there's a timetable on when there would be closure from these 22 or resolution from these 22 suits. And I don't know if the NFL would want to wait for that. So my guess is there will be a suspension. My guess would be it would be at the start of this season. But again, that's not a certainty. It depends on the NFL's investigation. They could talk to some more of the accusers. They've already talked to 10 or 11. They could talk to more. The league could. So, yeah, I'm working under the assumption that Deshaun Watson's going to be suspended. I believe the Browns are working under that assumption. Roger Goodell did not give any timetable for when a decision would be made or punishment handed down. He did say that the commissioner's exempt list is not in play unless there are pending criminal cases. So he's not going to say, hey, just sit out while this works its way through the legal system. He might do that if there were new criminal cases or if these criminal cases had not been resolved, the 2 grand juries. But where it stands now, that's not an option. So it's either suspension or Deshaun Watson gets to play.
Yeah. My feeling on the whole thing is, and, you know, listen, all these quarterbacks, they get these big deals, and then the question is, will they still be motivated? So, you know, listen, none of this is a guarantee, right? It makes the most sense football-wise, right, to get this elite quarterback, but, you know, how will he handle playing in the cold weather? Will he still be motivated with the contract? How does this off-field issues affect him? Does sitting out a year affect him at all? How do the Browns, you know, develop a plan around him? I mean, it's not like you just put him there and he automatically succeeds. You would think that he would, but there's a lot of things that go into play here. So you also give up a lot of draft picks, and you made it clear that, you know, you're not concerned about that. But at the end of the day, you gave up 3 number ones, okay? So Nothing. I basically, I guess I'm setting up my comment is I feel like the Browns are either going to make a deep run in the playoffs and finally get to the Super Bowl, or this is going to set them back 10 years. That's how I feel.
That's a pretty big gap there, Chud.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. And I think you made some good points that we have not been able to get to. He didn't play last year, right? You would assume there's going to be rust. Now, who knows? Maybe not. You know, he says he's been throwing and working out. But he didn't play at all last year. Right? So how does he come back from that? The cold weather you mentioned, and that was obviously a deterrent. And perhaps one of the reasons that he initially said no. And Jimmy Haslam acknowledged that, right? So does he get comfortable being here? Does he get comfortable playing in cold weather? The Browns get lucky and they don't have, you know, a lot of bad weather games. You know, you never know, right? 2 years ago, they had that string where they had like 3 straight bad weather games in November. Last year, I don't think they had many terrible weather games. So there's some luck involved there. I think it is worth noting that he just sat out last year. And yes, the legal situation had something to do with it, but his demand for a trade from the Texans came before the legal stuff became public. And it came like 6 months or 7-8 months after he'd gotten a long-term big money extension from the Texans. So do you have to worry about that if you're the Browns, where a year and a half from now, he says, you know what, I'm good. I did my time in Cleveland. I want to go somewhere else. I want to go to greener pastures. You know, will he have that kind of leverage given his history? Who knows? But I think that is something to keep in the back of your head, because we've already seen him do that with his first franchise, right? And he had agreed to a long-term contract with them. So I think those are all legitimate points. I think if it doesn't work out with Deshaun Watson, you make a good point, Joe. Then what happens, right? Now I'm working under the assumption that it does work out, because I think he's that talented, and I think he'll want to be here at least at the start, because he picked the Browns and they're paying him a ton of money and he's looking to reestablish himself. I think all those things will factor into it. But if he's not on the field for an extended period, right, whatever that is, 10, 12, 14 games from suspension, or he gets hurt because he hasn't played football in over a year or 2 years, yeah, then it's going to be tough for this organization to win at least in 2022. That doesn't mean they won't be able to win in 2023, but, you know, then you're another year far further away from when you had gone to the playoffs, and guys on your roster another year older, right? I mean, there's a lot that happens from year to year, but I do believe that if Deshaun Watson's on the field, he's a top, 7 quarterback in this league. And if you have that guy, it at least gives you a chance to compete with all the rest of these stud quarterbacks in the AFC, right? The Mahomes and the Jacksons and the Burrows and the Herberts and the Russell Wilson now. You know, there's a lot of big time quarterbacks in this conference, but I do think a healthy, productive Deshaun Watson, eligible Deshaun Watson, puts you right on the same footing with the rest of those teams.
Can you believe this offseason? Nothing like we've ever seen. I mean, Tyreek Hill, you just mentioned Russell Wilson. How about Tom Brady?
Yeah.
You know,
Devontae Adams.
Devontae Adams, that's unbelievable. I mean, the Packers with Aaron Rodgers. Every day there's something going on. I mean, it really is. You know, the NFL offseason has become more exciting than some other sports regular seasons. It's incredible. And
it is. And I really don't, like, part of me thinks that the league does that on purpose. Right.
Oh, for sure.
Right. And I know that they want
100%.
to, yeah. And I know that they want it to be a 12-month thing, right? Maybe except for June, they kind of shut down a little bit in June. But I don't know how you are able to manufacture that many storylines. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, Goodell doesn't go to Devontae Adams and say, hey, you want to go play with Derek Carr, your college quarterback, right?
Right.
He doesn't go to the Chiefs and say, hey, draw the line at how much you're willing to pay Tyreek Hill. But there is this environment created, and especially in the last few years, and part of it's agent driven and part of it's players with leverage, but there has been an environment created that not only allows, but probably encourages movement of big time players, and a lot of it. And that's completely different than it was 5-10 years ago. And quarterbacks being involved plays a huge part. No trade clauses for quarterbacks plays a big part. We saw that with Deshaun Watson. We saw that with Russell Wilson. And it's not going the other way, right? It's only going to get more and more, I would expect, which, can be scary. I think if you're a GM that's a little risk averse, I think you're going to have to change your mindset. I don't think Andrew Berry's risk averse or Paul DePodesta. So I think they're set up fine for this, but it's certainly a huge change. And you're right, Craig. I mean, it's the way of the NFL where everything is a huge headline, and it's almost 12 months a year.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't get out of control, though, because, one thing I did always like about I like when a Tom Brady stays in New England for a long time, or Roethlisberger in Pittsburgh. Bad example. I know I hate bringing his name up, but,
right.
I don't want it to get to the point where, like in the NBA, where the players start running the league. And I liked it when I was a kid, baseball, the Indians are, a team you root for had the same lineup for 5 or 6 straight years. And that kind of has changed now. I hope it doesn't get out of control, or maybe they're not worried because that's just the way society likes it now.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I don't know if the league is worried about it, but I think there should be concern. And I do think the league should look for some kind of happy medium where it's not every player has complete leverage. It's not your biggest names. It's a drop of a hat can say, I'm going to, trade me, right? I'm going to switch teams just because you have one losing season or you have one fight with the coach, whatever, right? That's probably fine for the players, or maybe even better for the players that they have that kind of leverage. But you're right. I think as a fan base, your fans don't want unimpeded, nonstop movement. And you mentioned the NBA, and there's backlash from the NBA, right? From all your superstars moving. And there is something to be said for if Patrick Mahomes plays 10 years in Kansas City or 15 years, right? I like seeing that. I'm with you. That's how you grew up. There's something to be appreciated about that. And I do think the league will try to strike that balance between, we like the movement, but it can't be unfettered movement.
So we hit on, obviously, the day he made the decision. We've talked about the news conference. We've talked about the owners meeting, added a little bit more. I have 2 more questions for you, and then I'm done. But before I get to that, anything else you want to mention on Watson and the past here? Obviously, Baker Mayfield's going to be one of my 2 topics. So besides him, anything else you want to hit?
Not on the past, but I don't know if you're going to ask me this or not, but I'll preempt you if you were. I do, and we'll talk about them, and we got months and months to talk about football, right? But I do think, and I wrote something about it this week that's on brownzone.com, I do think we're going to see a significant change in Kevin Stefanski's offense, right? And how many times have we talked about using 3 tight ends? And is this a run-first offense, right? And we thought that there would be, I don't want to speak for you, I thought there'd be more of a change from year 1 to year 2 of Stefanski's offense. I thought he might open it up more, and he didn't. And whether that was Baker Mayfield, whether that it was the receivers struggling, whatever it was, the offense lacked explosion in 2021. But I think you're going to see fundamental changes, whether it's more shotgun, whether it's less play action, whether it's more read option with Deshaun Watson, because he brings that running element to his game, because he's done certain things in Houston that Kevin Stefanski doesn't normally have in his offense. I think it's going to look different. I don't know, what percentage. I know if they want to say significantly different or wholesale changes different. But Kevin Stefanski's been asked about this a couple of times on Friday and then again at the owners' meetings. And he is certainly leaving the door open for big changes to his system. And I don't think that's a bad thing. We saw what happened last year. And obviously you have to adjust to your best players. And Deshaun Watson being quarterback, you have to adjust to what he does best. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. in how Kevin Stefanski tries to make the best use of Deshaun Watson's talents, which include throwing in the pocket, throwing outside of the pocket, extending plays, right? There's just so many things he does well, but I don't know if you're taking full advantage if you're under center running play action as much as the Browns did with 3 tight ends on the field, right? Like that feels like it kind of restricts what the quarterback can do. I think we might see things more spread out in 2022.
Well, right, because Stefanski has a different kind of quarterback than he's had. I mean, in the past in Minnesota and with Baker, and that leads us to Baker. Boy, if you're Baker, you're just sitting there going, man, they really didn't want me. They gave up all those draft picks and $230 million. I mean, talk about just, hey, you are not our guy. I mean, that it is evident now. So what's going to happen with him?
Yeah, I mean, he'll get traded. It's a question of when and where. And, Andrew Berry talked to I didn't go to the owners' meetings, but he talked to a handful of reporters at the owners' meetings and, said, hey, we're in no rush to trade Baker. He didn't want it. He doesn't want to be forced into a suboptimal trade, which I understand. But the reality is he's going to have to trade Baker Mayfield. Now, he doesn't have to trade him today or tomorrow. Now, he might if the right offer pops up, but it certainly doesn't look at this moment that the right option is going to pop up in the immediate future. And that's
didn't Barry mention that, well, maybe we'll ride into the season with 3 quarterbacks?
Yeah,
come on.
Yeah, you can't believe that, right? I mean, there's no way Baker plays for the Browns. Now, there's
I'll wash your car for a year if Baker Mayfield is on the Browns in the fall. Right? And I hope that doesn't happen. But
yeah, I mean,
there's no way.
There's no way. I mean, first of all, Baker doesn't want to be here. The Browns don't want him to be here. Now, you can make if you just took all like personalities out of the equation, you could say yes. Is there a situation where if Deshaun Watson gets suspended to start the year, you have Baker Mayfield and he's better than Jacoby Brissett? Man, you can make that argument, but the bridges have been burned. Baker's not going to play here. The Browns don't want him to be here, right? And they made that completely clear when they flew down to Houston to meet with Deshaun Watson. And before that, when they never offered Baker Mayfield a contract extension. So they've given up on Baker Mayfield. He's given up on them. It's just a matter of when it happens. So, yeah, Andrew Berry keeps continuing to say that because he's trying to create some leverage among teams. But it doesn't exist.
He wants teams to feel like, they might keep him. Oh, we better go get him. But here's the funny thing. He said that a day after Stefanski said that if Watson was suspended or would miss time, they would just roll with Jacoby Brissett.
Right. And Stefanski said they were hoping for closure, I think is the word he used.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. We all know the reality. I understand what Andrew Berry is saying and doing. And he's right. He doesn't have to trade him tomorrow. So from that standpoint, I understand he doesn't have to rush into a deal, right? Like if the deal on the table right now, let's just hypothetically say Seattle says, okay, we'll give you a 4th round pick, but you have to pay half of Baker's $19 million salary. Well, maybe at some point, Andrew Berry says, okay, we have to take that because that's better than us releasing Baker, getting nothing in return, and eating the $19 million, right? But, he's hoping for better, and I understand that. And, the draft feels like, a tipping point in this process. Is that, okay, if Seattle doesn't make a trade or doesn't draft a quarterback in the draft, in the early rounds of the draft, then they say, okay, we'll trade for Baker Mayfield and we'll give you X and you only have to pay $5 million of his salary or whatever. If they can come to terms with those things, right? Those are the variables. If the Browns have to pick up any salary, if the Browns have to throw in a draft pick, what draft pick would the Browns get in return? Or, are there other teams that become interested or become viable options given what happens when you get through the draft and you look at your roster and you say, okay, our roster is basically set through free agency in the draft. Do we need a quarterback? Now, maybe some teams will need a backup quarterback and be willing to take a shot on Baker. So that seems to be the date to keep in mind. It doesn't mean something couldn't happen before then. But right now, there's just not a market for him, right? You look around the league, and Seattle needs a starting quarterback, and Carolina needs a starting quarterback. Carolina could draft one. I think they're at number 6. They could draft one there, or even in the second round. They already have Sam Darnold on his 5th-year rookie option. I don't think they want Baker on his 5th-year rookie option. So that kind of dwindles you down to Seattle for starting jobs. Then it becomes, okay, what teams might want him as a backup, right? Would Tampa Bay want him, thinking perhaps long-term if Tom Brady retires, right? Or when Tom Brady retires. In those kind of situations where, hey, maybe if you have Baker in your building for a year, you get to know him, he plays a little bit. Hey, maybe he's a guy we can look toward the future with because he is a, former number 1 overall pick. But right now, there's just not a big market, especially one willing to take on the $19 million salary, which isn't a lot of money for a starting quarterback, but it's a ton of money for a backup quarterback.
Sure. All right, last thing, then I got to go take a nap so I can get up at 2:30 in the morning and get on the air. So last thing for you, Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry, do you buy into either of them coming back to the Browns?
I'll start with Jarvis. There is a possibility, right? That's what I've been told. His agent's telling people that there's mutual interest. It's all about the money. The Browns weren't willing to pay him $15 million. And yes, they needed the salary cap space, but it's also the fact that, okay, was Jarvis worth $15 million? I don't think they would pay him $15 million. I don't know what that sweet spot is. I don't know if he'd be willing to come back to a team that said, hey, you're not worth $15 million. We've talked about this before. There's ego involved. It's a lot easier for some players, maybe many players, to take less money somewhere else rather than less money from a team that was supposed to pay you a certain amount of money. We saw it with Sheldon Richardson a year ago. He took less money to go to Minnesota because the Browns asked him to take a pay cut. So I think there's things that would need to be worked out with Jarvis. I know that he'd much rather play with Deshaun Watson than Baker Mayfield. So that makes Cleveland an option to begin with. But, his agent said there's other teams interested. I don't know if there'll be resolution to this quickly either, Chud. I think, when you look at Jarvis Landry and you look at Jadeveon Clowney, these things could drag on a little bit. Clowney's proved throughout, the last few years when he's been a free agent that he's in no rush to sign. So those are still needs, right? Receiver, defensive end is a huge need. But I think Andrew Berry's shown that he's willing to be patient and maybe not rush into a deal or even wait for Jadeveon Clowney, right? If Clowney just wants to wait and make up his mind, I think Berry is willing to wait as well. When if you're a fan and you look at this roster, you go, oh my gosh, you need to go get a number 2 end. You need to go get a number 2 receiver. You need to go get, maybe a number 1 defensive tackle. I think Berry is patient enough that he's not going to force it, even though that could be scary for some fans. So, Landry, would I say, I'm not even sure I'd say 50-50 shot, but I do think there is a chance that he comes back if they can make the money work, or maybe if he finds that there's no other big offers, right? And then he says, okay, the Browns are willing to pay the most, or I feel most comfortable there. I'd like my chances of winning a Super Bowl, right, with Deshaun Watson as a quarterback. And then Odell, I don't think there's any chance Odell comes back. I know it's what's out there. I know, John Johnson III, had a Instagram video, which I think he just made up about, you didn't hear it from me, but Odell's coming back. I don't know how, if you're Andrew Berry, you could take Odell Beckham Jr. back after he quit on your team at midseason a year ago. And it wasn't just about Baker. Odell had asked to be traded long before things got really bad with Baker. So, years before, right? So why would you invite that back into your locker room? Why would you invite that back into your organization? What kind of message does that send? So I put the Odell thing at, I hate to say never, but I put it at about, 0.1 or, 0.5% chance that he could come back. So I don't think fans should have any hope of that, but it's okay to hang on to hope for Jarvis Landry.
All right. Boy, that was beefy, man. I think we got a lot in there.
We did, and I appreciate you staying up for me, Chud. getting this done with me because I think there were so many things that we had to get to. I'm glad we were able to finally hit them.
Yeah, no doubt. Now we'll wait for the next big things to happen, and that there'll be something coming down soon.
There will, and then even if there's not, then we get the draft in less than a month, right? I got to switch gears back to the draft. Now it won't be the same buzz without the first round pick, but Browns still have, a bunch of picks. They have 1 in the second round, 2 in the third round, 1 in the fourth round, I want to say. So, you can still do some work there.
The Browns just gave up the fans' next 3 Super Bowls to try to get to a real Super Bowl.
That's exactly right. That's well put. Well put. It's going to be weird. It's going to be weird not having those first round picks, assuming they don't trade back in the first round at some point. But that's a long time to go without a first round pick. We'll have to see if they stick to that and don't have one. So, Chud, thanks again, buddy. I appreciate it. We'll talk soon. We'll do another one of these. Everybody, thank you for listening to another episode of the Brown Zone Coverage Podcast. You can read all my work at brownzone.com. Thanks a lot.